It's hard to say that it's better than the original, but I think it's a great companion piece to it because it sort of enriches everything that's already there.
It's just this great mood piece that doesn't really need, I don't think that it needs to dig incredibly deep into the characters to work. That's not what he was going for, and it didn't need that.
It was nicely coincidental. This was just on TV, 2 nights ago?
Yeah.
And we, of course, clicked it and put the remote down, and we were watching.
So what are the best horror films made by directors that aren't really known to be horror directors? That, to me, sounds like a good podcast topic. What do you think?
I like it. That's why we stole it directly from Twitter. A conversation that the other Mad Wolf Pack was having. And I said, hey, let's do that.
Let's do it. And we're doing it now with a couple great special guests. Welcome. This is the Fright Club podcast, and she is Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And we are from madwolf.com. Welcome in. We're going to talk about that, and some of the movies might jump to mind very quickly, but some may not. But we'll get into those. But first, we want to say thank you to a rowdy crowd. I mean, rowdy. They were ready to party this past Friday, or a couple of Fridays ago now. I've lost track of time. Since we've moved Fright Club Live to Fridays at Gateway Film Center, that has turned out to be a good choice, a wise move, because we had a great crowd as we watched In Fabric, which was part of the Gateway's A24 retrospective they have going on right now. And it was a great choice because so many people had not seen the film.
It's true, and I was a little bit surprised by that because it had a pretty good run at Gateway when it first came out, but it's such an insane film and so fun to watch with people.
Yeah.
It's so fun to watch with people, and I feel like the crowd really enjoyed it.
They really did. It was one of the most interactive, I think. There were really lots of audience participation as the movie was unfolding. And
very
that's fun.
Spontaneously.
Yeah, and that's great. And it was great for us to watch it again because I really appreciated it more with the crowd. So, so that was fun. And we're going to continue that A24 retrospective next time out. We're going to be back for the September Fright Club Live on September 9th. And we are going to show The Black Coat's Daughter, another great one from A24.
It is a great one, and it's such a magnificent film to watch on a big screen. It's such a great example of visual storytelling. There's so much happening on the screen beyond what would be sort of in the script. Like if you just are watching the background, it tells a whole second story. I love that movie.
Yeah, and by the way, can I get a judge's ruling here? I go back and forth between saying A24 and A24. What's the right one to do?
I think it's commonly A24, but I always say A24, and that's probably why that gets stuck in your head.
Right.
And I don't know why I do, but I always say A24.
So
but that's probably
one.
why
You know
it's
what
in
we're
your
talking
head.
about. But we're going to be back on September 9th, 8 o'clock for the Mixer. We used to call it happy hour now, but now, that's too lowbrow.
That's
now
right.
It's
now
a
it's a
mixer.
mixer.
It's not a wine mixer, really, but it's a mixer.
You can have wine. We're just not going to now.
Why
We're
not?
going to drink cheap beer.
And then 9 p.m. is when we start the podcast, and 9:30 for the movie, so that's great. So thanks for last time. Looking forward to next time. Oh, and did you mention the topic for The Black Coat's Daughter?
Satanism in screen. I've been waiting. I love Satanism in movies. I love it.
That's a big topic.
It is a big topic. So we're going to really winnow, but I'm excited to cover it.
Okay.
Because, I love me a black mass.
Yes, exactly. So that's going to be good. That's September, and we've already got October Fright Club Live booked, and that's worth a mention because this is something a little bit different. We have had, over the years, premieres.
We have.
For Fright Club Live. Not that often, but we got another one coming up in October.
That's right. And this is a little bit, I know we just made the big leap to Fridays and we're moving. We're going to do it on the first Friday of October, specifically so that we can have the premiere of Piggy.
New Spanish horror film.
Oh my God.
Apparently it's brutal.
Brutal, and I cannot wait to get a chance to see it with a big crowd of people. Our topic is going to be mean girls and bullies. And I just hope everybody prepares yourself. Gird your loins for Piggy.
Gird your loins. Yeah, we haven't even seen it yet either, so we're looking forward to it. The film actually releases to the public the following Friday after our premiere on October 14th. So as you mentioned, that's why we're moving up and doing the first Friday of the month this time on the 7th. And that should be a good one, the premiere of Piggy. So make it if you can. Gateway Film Center, Columbus, Ohio. As we dig into mainstream directors making the leap to horror, and a good leap. Any rules before we introduce our special guests?
So the rules really are just for my own benefit. So I narrowed.
Aren't they always?
Well, what I'm saying is I didn't enforce the rules on our guests or even share them. So their list doesn't exactly mirror what I always have to put in parameters to just help us narrow down what we're going to. So I was not looking at directors who started out in horror. So no Jaws, right? I wasn't, and I wasn't, or Francis Ford Coppola, James Cameron. I wasn't looking at directors who started in horror and then branched out.
Okay.
And I wasn't really looking for horror filmmakers who made the leap to mainstream, right? So not Cronenberg, not Peter Jackson,
right.
People who were established as horror filmmakers
Okay,
and
that's
then
fair.
became mainstream. And then I also really wasn't looking for anybody who has made several horror films. I was looking really for somebody who just sort of out of the blue, here's a horror film, and wow, what kind of an impact that can have.
Okay.
And then there were a handful that didn't make the list that I just want to point out, because James Cameron, who did, if you don't know it, made not Piranha 2, The Spawning. They fly in that one. You should definitely watch Piranha 2, The Spawning. We used to watch that like every other week when I lived in Tiffin. Joy and I would watch that all the time. It's one of her favorites. And of course, Francis Ford Coppola did make Dimension 13, which is worth watching. So a couple and Dracula, right? A couple that I really tossed around. So Lars von Trier, who did The House That Jack Built and Antichrist, and because really almost all of his movies could be considered horror films. They're certainly horrific.
Right.
And we talk about Antichrist all the time, so I didn't put that. Another one, Michael Haneke, who did both Funny Games,
right.
Which we've talked about a lot. And also, I think Benny's Video counts as a horror movie. And again, almost everything he makes has undertones. I mean, I would even say The White Ribbon can potentially be considered. I mean, it's certainly horrific. So... And then Jim Jarmusch, our beloved Jim Jarmusch. And I would think that really Only Lovers Left Alive deserves to be on this list. It's just an absolutely magnificent horror film. But he also, of course, he did The Dead Don't Die, which was one of our premieres.
It was.
So, anyway, they've dabbled enough in it that even though they're not known for it, I kind of decided to leave them off.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Well, we've gone too long without introducing our guests here in studio. Well, actually, both of the guests have been on with us separately, but not together.
Correct.
So now it's one big happy party. Welcome in Brandon Thomas, who's one of our writers at madwolf.com. And I forget the topic that you joined us last time. What did we talk about last time you were here?
I think it was best openings.
Okay, that's a goodie.
Nice.
All right, so Brandon's here in the studio, and on the phone, if you listen to our other podcast, our weekly podcast, The Screening Room, you know him as the Schlocketeer, bringing us up to date on all the studio news every week. We welcome in on the phone, Daniel Baldwin.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Or should we call you the man who was just retweeted by Jamie Foxx?
I think maybe that is your new name.
That was weird. And about a horror movie. So.
Yeah. Daniel just made a real nice recommendation on the Day Shift, the new Jamie Foxx vampire movie on Netflix, and you said you wanted more, green light more right now, and Jamie Foxx jumped all over that tweet.
Yeah, he did. my notifications just lit up like a Christmas tree that day.
Good deal. All right, so you're both together to help us on this topic because we know you're very knowledgeable on films in general, on horror films, and we love to get your input. And I think you guys are working on your own podcast together, right?
We are. We have actually recorded 2 episodes. We're just waiting on some opening titles to come in for us, and I'm going to be nudging our person a little bit more. So hopefully we can actually do some more recording sooner rather than later on that.
Do we have a title of this podcast?
We do. It's called Exploitation on the Double, and it focuses on double feature podcast, like 2 movies that we would love to see paired together as a double feature.
Nice. All right, so we'll be looking forward to that. Let us know when it's live. And we'll let everybody know. Okay, so welcome in. So we've got our 5, and we'll just count those down and then go as we count down. We'll just let Brandon and Daniel chime in on their numbers, right?
And again, just in case you missed the opening, we stole this topic from a conversation that Brandon and Daniel were having on Twitter.
And we're not too proud to say so.
No, I'm admitting it right now.
Darn right. Okay, so let's jump in. Our number 5 on mainstream directors making great horror. This is from 1979. Count Dracula moves from Transylvania to Wismar, spreading the Black Plague across the land. Only a woman pure of heart can bring an end to his reign of horror. This is Werner Herzog. Nosferatu, the vampire.
Der Fluch des Vampirs Nosferatu.
of the things I think is funny about this movie is that Herzog wrote the screenplay and Bram Stoker gets writing credit, and F.W. Murnau is nowhere to be mentioned, even though it's really a remake of Nosferatu. Right down to the look of the vampire, which is one of the things that makes it so spectacular because, as you know, George, my favorite vampire is the Max Schreck version of Nosferatu. Sure. And Werner Herzog is such a weirdo.
He is.
Like, in anything he makes, in any appearance he makes, I think, and Daniel and Brandon, I think we both agree, the best short from last year's Nightmares Film Festival was My Dinner with Werner, because it was hilarious.
So
and it was,
funny.
Yeah, and it was Klaus Kinski, of course, in this film, and he's playing the vampire. And Isabelle Adjani is playing Lucy, not Mina. And that's one of the things I think is interesting about this, too. You know, as people have remade Dracula over the years, they just kind of mix and match characters. They decide is it going to be, like in this case, it's not Mina, it's Lucy, although in the book it's Mina. And anyway, it's an interesting mishmash of the Bram Stoker story and the Nosferatu tale, which is quite different. And the Nosferatu tale does sort of suggest, I think, pestilence, whereas Herzog went on and made it the Black Plague. Like that is what the sort of metaphor was, as opposed to Fear of the Foreigner, which is what the book's metaphor is. So it's an interesting idea, and also the fact that, I hope this isn't a spoiler, it is a movie that came out like 45 years ago. Jonathan Harker is the bad guy at the end, which I love.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a gorgeous film. It's stunning to look at. The score is unbelievable, and I just think that it is an exceptional horror film from a guy who didn't really make horror.
Yeah, and there's been many legendary stories down through the years about the relationship between Klaus Kinski and Werner Herzog, which I'm sure was a laugh a minute. And also, this movie is different because it sort of implies you don't know how much of what we're seeing is reality and how much is sort of like a dream world that Harker is living in.
You know, it's been quite some time since I've seen this version of Dracula, and you know, it's hard not to just stare at Kinski in the makeup because he already has those piercing eyes, and in anything that you see him in, it doesn't matter. You're just sort of, you know, captivated by him. So putting him in the additional makeup and the movement that he does is just, it's eerie. It's not Max Schreck, but it's darn close.
I absolutely love it. Obviously, the acting is superb. The script is great. You know, it's hard to say that it's better than the original because, you know, the original Nosferatu is just so striking a film from top to bottom. But I think it's a great companion piece to it because it sort of enriches everything that's already there. And I also love all of the location shooting. You know, we have thousands, maybe even 1 million vampire movies at this point, but not too many of them actually bother to shoot in locations that actually look like it would be Romania or Transylvania.
Yeah.
This is definitely one of them, and it really just adds to the mystique and otherworldly feel of the whole thing.
Yeah,
Good
it really
point.
does. Yeah, you're exactly right. The atmosphere in this movie is so perfect, and there are so many versions of Dracula that it's very hard to give a shit. And this one, you know, it just sucks you in.
And that's Werner Herzog, number 5 on our list of mainstream directors making great horror, his 1979 Nosferatu the Vampire. All right, so Brandon, what was your number 5 on this?
My number 5 is Near Dark by Catherine Bigelow.
Nice. That's a good choice.
It is a good one.
You know, Bigelow, even though it's only her second feature film, I think most people, when they hear Catherine Bigelow, they think action films or, you know, more prestige, you know, prestige dramas like Zero Dark 30 or The Hurt Locker. But Near Dark is a great mashup of horror and even modern day Western. And I think that, you know, it's a movie that's sort of coming back more in the public conscious because it was on Shudder, so a lot more people are getting a chance to see it, and it's got an amazing cast. I mean, she basically just took almost the entire cast from Aliens, which had been made the year before. You know, Lance Henriksen, Bill Paxton, Janine Collins? I can't remember her, but you know,
Vasquez.
Who plays Vasquez? You know, the badass. But it's such a fantastic mashup of genres, but it's, you know, so horrific. I mean, the vampires, these are not your sexy, strutting around by candlelight vampires. These guys will rip your throat out. And there's an absolute banger of a scene in a bar involving Bill Paxton that just, you know, it's an all-timer scene as far as vampire movies go. And I just think I'm glad to see it finally getting its due with modern audiences.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Actually,
it's just a great movie.
When I think of Catherine Bigelow, I instantly think was that really her in the airport that time? Remember, we were in the airport and we were eating, and this woman was eating by herself at a few tables away. I think it was her. It looked a lot like her, but anyway.
Did you say finger licking good? Might have gone over differently if it wasn't Catherine Bigelow, or even if it was her.
I think this is one that has only over the years grown in stature. I think the more time goes on, more and more people just, refer back to this as a real cult favorite.
Yeah, and it didn't do very well when it came out, and I think a lot of people say that, it came out like the exact same time as The Lost Boys, which is essentially the same movie, but way glossier, and with hotter boys in it. So, I do think that this one got overlooked when it came out, but its stature has only grown. I mean, it's just a fascinating, super fun movie.
Agreed. That's Brandon's number 5. Near Dark. Oh, Daniel's got a good one.
Well, I went with Luca Guadagnino's remake of Suspiria, and of course, it's a bit of a cheat for me because I already had both of your lists, so I could look at it and say, well, they already picked some of the ones I was considering putting on mine, so I'll just put on something different.
Yeah.
And that's what I did here. Suspiria is one of my all-time favorite films, the original. And the concept of anyone remaking it just sounded like folly to me. How do you do that? How do you do that and make it impactful and its own movie? And against all odds, I think he did it. He came at it from an entirely different angle.
Yep.
The subplot involving the professor doesn't quite work for me all the way, although it does feed back into the main themes. But I love that he just centered it around the witches themselves, around female empowerment, especially in a time where that was being stifled repeatedly, and then also feeding into women who abuse power and abuse power on each other, and then of course getting their just desserts in the end for not being the coven that they should be. I was really floored by how much I loved the film, its sense of style, which again, compared to the Argento one, how do you top that? Well, you don't try to. You do your own thing with it.
Yes, exactly right. I came to it a little bit differently in that Suspiria, I'm not a big of a fan of the originals. A lot of people are. And I loved this one. I just thought he added so many layers of meaning to the story. And like you say, come about it in a totally different way, especially with the colors. You're not going to try to recreate that from the original. So it went totally the different way, all browns, all earth tones. But to me, it was the storytelling was so much richer.
Tilda.
Tilda.
Oh, my God. She's just a glorious god. She's so great in everything, and she's so great 3 times in this movie.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I love, and I am a big fan of the original. But one of the things that I thought was so great about this is that the original, for all of the brilliance that it is a misogynistic film. And I loved that he avoided that completely in this. And that, in fact, the only men in the movie are literally playthings.
Yes.
They are just puppets. And I thought that was absolutely a fascinating approach and very welcome from a male filmmaker.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I love the fact that, you talk about Tilda playing 3 different roles. I love that one of them is basically her playing Max von Sydow. She almost looks exactly like Max von Sydow. Yeah, I think Daniel's spot on. Is the only way that you can remake a movie like Suspiria is to just do something completely different, like almost devoid of color. It's almost depressing in the way that it portrays winter in Europe, that you just your hands and your feet start to get cold by doing this. But it's such an elegant way to tell the movie, and it really is. It's one of the better remakes in that it does its own thing. It's not trying to say just remember all of this from the original. No, this is its own thing.
Yeah, good choice.
Yeah, fantastic choice.
Yes.
In fact, when we saw your list, we couldn't believe we forgot that.
Yeah.
So good. So those are all number 5s. Moving up to our number 4. This is from 1963. Hill House has stood for about 90 years and appears haunted. Its inhabitants have always met strange, tragic ends. Now Dr. John Markway has assembled a team of people who he thinks will prove whether or not the house is haunted. Robert Wise and The Haunting.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
Oh, this house. You have to watch it every minute.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace? That some houses, like Hill House, are born bad?
I remember, I saw this movie when I was a little kid, and I've seen it like 100 times because I am a massive Shirley Jackson fan. And I remember, like, I don't know, decades later, realizing that this was the same guy who made The Sound of Music. And I thought,
And West Side Story.
I know, and West Side Story.
Yeah.
So interesting. Like, this is quite a departure for him. And it's just, it's rated G, which also always kills me because it is a terrifying movie, but it doesn't show you anything. It really... It's black and white, it's gorgeous, and it really is one of the best examples of psychological horror because it's all in your head. Of course, it's all in Eleanor's head anyway.
Some great sound design as well.
Oh, my God, so great. This is, we've talked about this a couple of times in different podcasts for, like, very specific reasons, like the Teddy character and things like that. But overall, and of course, it was remade. There was a TV series made based on a novel, and of course, there was a horrifying, terrible 1999 version with Liam Neeson that was just garbage. But this movie is just so spectacular in the way that it does justice to the source material.
Yeah, and it was actually, he first got a hold of that source material while he was in post-production on West Side Story.
Wow.
So I do a real about-face there. And it's a fantastic bit of getting through to you without being overtly scary. You mentioned the G rating, which is crazy.
It is.
But it's creepy. And, of course, Julie Harris is fantastic.
Yeah, she is.
What I really appreciate about this movie especially is because of Wise, and when you think of Robert Wise as a film fan, you think of these grand, large movies, of course, like you mentioned, West Side Story and The Sound of Music, but also he directed Star Trek The Motion Picture, which is a big, coming right after Star Wars, and at least we got to get in Star Trek too. So, the minimalism of The Haunting just shows like, okay, this guy was obviously capable of much, much more. It wasn't all about just like, okay, throwing everything at the screen. It's like, let's mess with the audience with what you don't see. And then obviously with that G rating too is not, of course being 1963 itself, there wasn't going to be a copious amounts of gore and blood. So, really getting into people's heads. So completely different from what audiences would have expected from Robert Wise at that point.
And actually many of a lot of the scenes were inspirations for the Haunted Mansion at Disney World.
Nice. I could see that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh, I absolutely love The Haunting. I love the original novel. Hate the 1999 remake.
I think we're all in agreement there.
Yeah.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. The miniseries version on Netflix recently was good, but it just takes a completely different path with the story and focuses more on the characters. But God, Wise's The Haunting is just such a striking piece of horror filmmaking from top to bottom. The atmosphere, the minimalist special effects. Not too many films can get away with implying horror rather than showing it as much as that one does. But he just really knocked it out of the park and, didn't really do a whole lot of horror across his massive career. But, talk about hitting a home run with this one. It's a phenomenal film.
Yeah, it's really one of those that stands out as a director's film.
Yeah.
Even though we mentioned Julie Harris and Claire Bloom. I don't know if we mentioned Claire Bloom. But it really just stands out as a mark of a director's film. His thumbprint is all over it.
You know what I think? Just immediately double feature that jumps to mind for me with this movie is The Innocents, which is another one that is a gorgeous,
or maybe
elegant,
The Others?
Black and white. The Others and The Innocents are almost the same movie.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's just remarkable filmmaking.
Yep, that's our number 4, The Haunting from '63. All right, Brandon, a little bit more recent for your number 4.
Well, yeah, my number 4 is Misery from Rob Reiner. Probably for me, this is one of the more surprising ones because, you look at the films that Reiner was doing leading up to Misery. You have Spinal Tap, you have The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally. I mean, these are all 3 distinctly different movies, and then you go into a Stephen King adaptation. Yeah. I can't imagine anyone seeing that coming from Rob Reiner. And then especially, too, you look at his acting background as, Meathead from All in the Family. That's, just surprising in general in that era that he came into directing. And, and I think that coming from that background himself, you look at a movie like Misery, which, Hope was just talking about how The Haunting is a director's film. I think this one's very much an actor's film. I mean, it's a great showcase for James Caan and especially Kathy Bates, which I believe was her first feature film that she had been in, and is just, my God, what a statement she
Oscar
made.
winner.
Oscar winner coming right out of the gate. And it's such a great showcase for those two, and the horror. The great story from Misery itself is in the novel. You know, there's the famous hobbling scene in the movie. In the novel, she cuts his feet off with an axe.
Yeah.
Which I think the sledgehammer in the movie is way more horrific.
Oh, I do too.
It's so visceral. So
yes,
visceral.
It absolutely is. This was one of our first dates.
It was.
This was one of our first dates.
Kind of set the tone, didn't it?
It kind of did, yeah. It's Kathy Bates is perfection in this movie. She is absolutely terrifying and hilarious. And yeah, James Caan is also great. And you know, I mean, he spends nearly the entire film acting from a bed. That's got to be tougher than you would think, but he really pulls it off. There's a lot of just anguish and also just like, you know, sort of the mental calculations that you can see trying not to come out on his face because he's trying. It's a really, I think, underappreciated performance.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good one. Brandon's number 4 is Misery. All right, Daniel, you're up.
Well, first on the Misery part, my favorite thing about it is the casting. I know initially they were going for more of like a Harrison Ford, William Hurt type for the lead. And while that could have worked, I think it just adds an extra layer to the fact that it's Sonny Corleone laying in that bed, getting hobbled. Khan's tough guy persona, and then seeing him be constantly emasculated throughout just really drives the entire thing.
Good point.
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Yeah, for sure.
End of tweet.
End of tweet, yeah. I was not hip to that until he passed away. I thought, I didn't know he did that. So that was really nice where they did that with his family.
Yeah, that was really nice.
End of tweet. But there's some great, and you guys shared them, some hilarious James Caan stories came out of that I hadn't heard of. Just some of the stuff that he would do with something about his local
video
store guy, store guy. Oh, my God. Just funny stuff. Okay, I jumped the gun a bit, but now you're up, Daniel. Number 4.
My number 4 is The Omen, which, you know, it doesn't really get as much play these days, and I think it has everything to do with the style of the film it is. It's very purposeful. You know, the whole film, it starts like a prestige, you know, 70s drama. You've got wholesome Gregory Peck with his wholesome family. He just had his first child. Obviously, there's some complications there, but it's just everything is nice and prim and proper and perfect. And then as the film goes on, poor Gregory Peck basically slowly gets sucked into a Hammer horror movie and just traumatized more and more to the point where he can believably try to stab a child to death at the end of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not really something you picture Gregory Peck doing, but I think Richard Donner, who had only done a couple of films beforehand and never really did any horror afterwards, I think he did a great job of just kind of lulling you into that as it goes along and then slowly ratcheting up the gothic atmosphere as the film goes on.
I think that you have nailed the secret to this movie exactly, and it is Gregory Peck. So one of the things that I've talked about before when we talk about The Hills Have Eyes, this is going to be a weird comparison, but bear with me, is the whole point of The Hills Have Eyes is to convince you, the audience, that you believe these people are going to eat a child. And so you start off like you would now. Obviously, the baby is going to be fine at the end of the movie, and then little by little, he convinces you, Wes Craven convinces you, no, they're going to eat that baby. And I think that that's the same secret of this movie, is that it's Gregory Peck. And you're like, no way, Gregory Peck. He's going to figure out some other way around this. There's no way. And then little by little, it wears him down to the end where you're like, well, he's gonna. And I think there's a lot about this movie. And it's funny because it's a movie that for me over the years, I loved it when I was a little kid because we're Catholic. All Catholic people love this movie. And then I didn't like it as I got older. I thought it was kind of bloated, and I thought it. And then you know, revisiting it years later, I'm like, no, you know what? This is a good movie. I mean, it really. And of course, you love some White Claw. No,
I don't love White Claw.
I can't remember her name.
Billy Whitelaw.
That's it. Thank you.
As Mrs. Baylock. I still want my Mrs. Baylock origin story one of these days. I also love this because I believe this was 1976, so I was 12 years old. This was one of my first in-theater R-rated horror movies.
Wow.
I don't know how I got somebody to take me, but so I've always loved this one. There's so much great about it. The score. I believe won an Oscar. The score is fantastic. Gregory Peck, Lee Remick, who was also very big at the time, and little Harvey Stevens. as
Perfect.
Damien. And then you've got that iconic scene with Jack Palance's daughter,
Yep.
Holly, with
Yeah.
the Damien, It's All For You.
Yeah.
And speaking of rest in peace, David Warner.
That's right.
Has a great
Yeah.
part here.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to love about this movie.
Oh, and David Warner, his exit out of the movie is probably the best kill in any
Oh,
horror
it's
movie
fantastic.
in the 70s. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
that pane of glass
Yeah.
decapitating
Perfect.
him in slow motion.
Yeah.
Woo, that one
So
was
good.
After that had been, forewarned by he
Yeah,
saw the
yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
it's great.
Well, I think Hope she's spot on with the casting of Gregory Peck. It reminds me very much, I love that surprise casting that they were doing in the late 60s and early 70s. It reminds me very much of casting Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West
Yeah.
as the villain.
Yeah.
And, the big stories, that's how it was sold to him. When Sergio Leone wanted him, is like, imagine this person gunning down these children, the camera pans around, and it's Henry Fonda.
I know.
Woo, yeah.
Especially
Sold.
when at the time you were mainly seeing all of these old time stars resurrected in the big disaster movies with
right.
the
Yeah.
big ensemble cast
Right.
and everybody was in it. But this one, no, he's right at the heart
Oh,
of it.
yeah.
Yeah. So it went against the grain a little bit that way as well.
Yeah.
Good choice. Richard Donner with The Omen for Daniel's number 4. Okay, moving up to number 3. Boy, this is a classic and one that we have spoken about this before, haven't we?
I don't know.
We're talking about famous directors. You can't get much better than Ingmar Bergman as we move up to 1968. While vacationing on a remote German island with his younger pregnant wife, an artist has an emotional breakdown while confronting his repressed desires. Hour of the Wolf.
Ingmar Bergman's Hour of the Wolf. The hour in which reality becomes a mockery of madness and masks hide behind faces. The hour of all final moments. Ingmar Bergman's Hour of the Wolf. A diary of truths and lies like truths.
So, across 70 films, Ingmar Bergman has flirted with horror on
Yeah.
a number of occasions. And
Yeah.
in fact, I think there are a lot of his films that you could consider horror. Seventh Seal, you could consider that. Virgin Spring, I don't know if you could consider that, but you could certainly consider Wes Craven's remake, which is The Last House on the Left. So clearly there's some horror in that
Yeah.
story. But this is the one that I think stands out as being a genre film for him. And I don't think one that's remembered as well as it ought to be, because it's my favorite. It's my favorite Bergman movie. It's so dreamlike. There's a mental collapse at the center of the film, which is Max von Sydow, of course.
Of course, yeah.
And his pregnant wife, Liv Ullmann, of course. I remember the first time I saw it, what stuck out to me more than anything else was she's pregnant, and there's at one point she says she just wishes he would kiss her once. And I was a little kid, and I thought that was the saddest moment in any movie I'd ever seen in my life. And she is such a tragic but resilient character, and really just an enigma, her character is, which is funny because she's the one constant. She's the one really not ethereal kind of figure in the whole movie. I love everything about this movie. Obviously, it looks glorious.
It does.
Right? The light, the shadow, clearly,
black and
because
white.
it's Bergman. I love the way his madness takes form. I love the sort of the way it touches on vampire myths and just creepy folklore and meshes them together so you don't know what to expect because it's not really following any specific rules. I love everything about this movie.
Yeah, Bergman himself defined the actual Hour of the Wolf as the time between midnight and dawn, when most people die, when sleep is deepest, when nightmares are most palatable. It is the hour when the sleepless are pursued by their sharpest anxieties, when ghosts and demons hold sway. It's also the hour when the most children are born. Wow.
Huh.
That's a lot to tackle for a movie. But you're right. Even when not too long ago, we watched The Seventh Seal again.
Yeah.
And it just, I think watching that again reminded me how much I like this movie.
Yeah.
It probably is one of my favorites, Bergman. I haven't seen them all because you're right, there's 70 of them. But it's really, really good.
Yeah, it's been a very long time since I've seen this. I think I saw it in college for the first time and haven't revisited it since. But thinking back on that viewing, what really stuck with me for the movie is that emotional distance between the characters and like Hope said, how sad that really is. Like there's just such a huge chasm between the two from the start. And as his descent begins, it just gets wider and wider and wider. And, there are so many metaphors in this film, outside of a horror film. But, that's really what sticks with me in that is just that emotional collapse between the two of them.
And Daniel, I think you just watched this for the first time?
Yes, last night.
What'd you think?
I loved it.
Yay.
We were just talking about Stephen King, and this almost feels like a proto-Stephen King story. I mean, you have an artist who is troubled by his own demons who will eventually consume him, and, the family member who wants to help as best she can, but there's just really nothing that she can do to, stop the downfall from occurring. And then, of course, the heartbreak that leaves her with. And it was just, it's just a beautiful film. And, I knew I'd love Max von Sydow in it when I sat down to watch it. But Liv Ullmann really made a mark on me when I was sitting down with it last night. It's just a haunting performance. You just want to scream at her to just leave. He's not worth it. Just leave.
Yeah.
But she can't. And, it's just a surreal waking nightmare, not in the sense of, phantasmagoria so much, but just a really depressing and emotionally taxing situation. I just loved every minute of it. I'll definitely be watching it again soon.
I'm so glad. For me, in revisiting it like years later after the first time I saw it, it was always the gun when they set that gun down. I remember, and then, so the first time I maybe not paid much attention to that, but after you know what happens with the gun, that always still does. It just makes my stomach clench, like, God, the gun.
Yeah. Looks like this was also number 3 for Brandon, right? So I just have down that Daniel has one to add.
No, my actual number 3 is, I believe, your number 2.
That's why.
That's
because there was overlap.
Okay. You're
That's
right.
why we're
All right.
skipping.
Yeah.
The notes were confusing me, but Daniel had another one to add here at number 3.
Yes, Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now. Speaking of waking nightmares.
Yeah.
Just, oh gosh, it's just a stylish and haunting look at grief, what that can do to you, how it can change your perception of reality, and perhaps even lead to your own demise. I mean, it's just, Roeg kind of flirted with horror again after this. He did the children's movie, The Witches, and then he did a sort of a supernatural drama in the 90s that I haven't seen called Cold Heaven, but he never really came at horror as hard as he does here. And it's almost like a less sleazy Giallo film.
Yes. I think that's how we always categorize it as well.
I could definitely see that. And I think as great as the 2 lead performances are, Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, you mentioned the word stylish, and that makes me think of a director's film, because it's so stylish.
Yeah, it's poetic, really, and that's what the film feels to me is like poetry. And one of the other reasons that I like it so much, and we did a whole podcast once on grief as the motivating underlying vehicle for horror. And when I looked at this in that whole list, what I loved about it is that it's a man's grief at losing a child that is the underlying tension in this movie. And that's almost unheard of, I'm telling you, because we researched it for a podcast. It's always the mother's grief. And I love that. I mean, it's not as if Julie Christie's character is not full of grief, but the point of view character and the one who's just losing his shit over this is the father, which makes this an interesting perspective.
And of course, it's remembered so often for that twist at the end.
Yeah,
but
that's not my favorite part.
Right, exactly. I'm with you there.
Yeah.
It's in just talking again about coming to couples that are slowly coming apart and disintegrating. That's something in these types of movies that always, again, sticks with me, is because it's so real. It's emotionally real. It doesn't matter like what other supernatural aspects might be happening in the movie or whatever twist ending is there at the end. But going forward, throughout that forward momentum throughout the film is this disintegration between this couple and the horror that's causing.
I think you're right. It's the emotional honesty that makes the whole supernatural element work.
Yep. That's a good choice for Daniel's number 3, Don't Look Now. Moving up to number 2, this is actually Daniel's number 1, so we're almost of like minds here. This is the classic, talked about it many times. A family heads to an isolated hotel for the winter. You know it, Stanley Kubrick's 1980 classic, The Shining.
Mom, do you really want to go and live in that hotel for the winter?
Sure I do. It'll be lots of fun.
The only thing that can get a bit trying up here during the winter is the tremendous sense of isolation.
Is there something bad here?
I fear you will have to deal with this matter in the harshest possible way.
Here's Johnny.
What you said, we have talked about this hundreds of times.
As
Hey,
has
Daniel,
everyone.
Daniel, tell us why it made your list.
Oh God, I love the book. The film is completely different from the book, but it's just a masterpiece in its own right because it's just an extreme exercise in style. There's a lot of talk sometimes about other films that Kubrick enjoyed beyond his own. I believe he was a big fan of both Smokey and the Bandit and Cannonball Run, which is kind of funny to think about him sitting down and watching those.
It is.
But you never really hear much about him or any love or affinity he had for the horror genre. So it's hard to know exactly what films, made a mark on him and fueled his vision here. There's some instances here and there where you can pick apart some things, but it's just an exercise in terror from start to finish. I know Stephen King's biggest nitpick with the film is that, it's Jack Nicholson. He's crazy from frame one. I mean, how
Right.
could he not be? He's Jack.
Right.
But that doesn't really matter because it's just ratcheting up the tension as it goes. His craziness is ratcheting up. And, contrary to what King said, there is a lot of nuance in Nicholson's performance. He's still playing with the fact that deep down, Jack Torrance, no, he doesn't want to kill his family, but he's being compelled to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, God, I don't even know how to put into words. The first time I saw this film, I had to stay up for a medical test. I had to stay up all night long and then go to sleep in a lab. And this is one of the movies that my father showed me to keep me awake. And boy, did it do the trick.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, there's so many great, for lack of a better word, Kubrickian, touches all over this film.
Yeah.
The shots. And I do admit to occasionally going down the rabbit hole of Shining fan theories, which I think are very amusing. And it always takes me back to quotes that I've read from Kubrick himself, where he just says, it's a silly ghost story. Some of these fan theories are just so outlandish. They're funny. And yeah, it's a ghost story, people, and it's a good one.
It is, and I think that Nicholson is perfectly cast because one of the things I think that the film gets right is that it does toss aside so many King-isms, including that wholesome, hokey, sentimental, good guy who gets corrupted kind of storyline, because I just think that that's so predictable and trite. And I love that you start off with a guy who's just not right. I mean, look at his face. He's just not right. And then, and then he's looking at if you watch the fan theories and you zoom in, he's looking at a playgirl not even a playboy. Like, what's going on with this guy? I love that. And also I know that, right, of course, she got a Razzie for her performance, Shelley Duvall,
Yeah.
and she's also perfect.
She's perfect.
Because who doesn't want to kill her? All of us do.
Yeah.
Everybody does. And I love that
and
about
if you
it.
read some of the quotes about that casting, that was exactly what Kubrick was going for.
Yeah,
exactly.
and he made her miserable, which is unfortunate. Like, I'm
Right.
sorry that the and also Scatman Crothers had a terrible time. I'm sorry that the actors had such a Nicholson seemed to thrive, but I mean, I'm sorry that on the set was not a good time for anybody. And it's
Because he is known for countless takes.
But for me, the end result is next to perfection.
There's so many classic moments that have become iconic for good reason.
Yeah, what I really love about The Shining is you can take it and, like, say a movie we talked about earlier, Misery, and put them against one another, and they're completely different exercises. I mean, Misery could be a stage play, and it has been a stage play before.
Right.
Whereas, Kubrick's version of The Shining is something that could have only been done as a movie, as a film. The visuals in it are incredible. And you have so many iconic ones, whether it's Nicholson carrying the axe, busting through the door, the Here's Johnny, the hedge maze, the blood coming out of the elevator. I mean, it's all there, and it's just this great mood piece that doesn't really need, I don't think that it needs to dig incredibly deep into the characters to work. That's not what he was going for, and it didn't need that.
No, you're right. It is one of the most cinematic films you're going to find in horror, for sure.
Yeah, and just sums up. You can take a look at so many different shots, and that just sums up a Kubrick type of film. And yes, also the same way with 2001 and so many of his others. But, the wide pullback, how well it worked for the confines of the hotel.
Oh, yeah, to create that, claustrophobia, even in the outdoors.
Yeah.
The claustrophobia because of the weather.
And when they're in the bathroom and that power shift change that we always talk about.
God, yeah.
Where, no, you are the caretaker.
Yeah,
God, I love that scene.
It's
it starts pulled back and just the antiseptic nature of a bathroom that's clean like that, and then it just gets such more intimate and intimate as the power shifts. Love it. Stanley Kubrick. That's our number 2 and Daniel's number 1. So Brandon has a different number 2 here, but another great one.
Yeah, I do. My number 2 is William Friedkin and The Exorcist.
One of my all-time favorite horror movies. That's when people have to pin me down. I normally it's hard, but I almost just go to this one because it's just great.
For me, if you look at, back to back, The French Connection and The Exorcist, the change in style,
wow, that's
and how
true.
perfectly those styles suit the content.
Mm-hmm.
The way is like you were talking about, like Kubrick coming in on something. The whole first act of this movie are these massive wide shots, and then the next part of it is medium close-ups, and then the longer we're in that house, the tighter the frame gets, the closer you are to evil, the more
then
you
you're finally
feel trapped.
Just in the bedroom.
Yeah,
only in the bedroom.
Yeah, the direction, everything about it. The writing is brilliant, and the special effects, of course, were ahead of their time, and the performances were exquisite. But I love the use of camera in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about the movie is, of course, the visuals, are all there, but the way in which Friedkin allows you to get to know the family, get to know Chris, get to know Reagan, even, Father Marin and Father Karras. But as the movie gets tighter and as things get more claustrophobic and more horrific, you're almost feeling more horror at what these people are going through than what you're seeing on the screen, because it feels, again, going back to family, it feels like the most horrific type of disintegration of a family that could actually happen.
Yeah, that's why it's a slow burn. I mean, it takes a while just for that reason. And even the cop too, Kinderman, you get to know him as well.
Yeah.
Being a film fan, and so he winds up he's a fan of her work and everything. It takes a while, but it pays off with that emotional investment for sure. Daniel.
Yeah. Oh, it's The Exorcist is this is another instance where I cheated. I didn't have to put The Exorcist on my list because it was on Brandon's list.
Yeah.
But it's an absolute classic. And hope you're right about the contrast between The French Connection and The Exorcist, and I'd even go so far as to add Sorcerer right after it.
Oh,
right.
All
of them
right. Yeah.
That was a style
different.
that suited the content unbelievably well.
Yeah, I love Sorcerer.
Friedkin was just firing on all cylinders right then and just completely nailed 3 different genres, particularly horror, in a way that he never has since. He's dabbled in the genre a bit since then, never to as great effect as he did here. And I think a lot of the reason that The Exorcist works where, imitators since have failed is that it treats, whatever anyone's personal beliefs might be, it treats the Christian and satanic aspects of the movie just as mythology, just like you would if you were doing a Greek mythology film or a Roman one or anything else. And he just looks at it matter-of-factly and lays it out and focuses on the characters instead, and that in turn informs, the supernatural stuff that's going on screen, and it just makes it more impactful as it goes along.
And I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, I think it was about 4 years ago, the documentary called Friedkin Uncut. Was basically just a big conversation with him about this movie and others. Very good. Very good.
Also, Killer Joe. Just watch Killer Joe.
Killer Joe.
Yes.
Bug,
Killer Joe and Bug.
Because Friedkin definitely had a big old slump period. Like a really, what was the Guardian, about the killer
the
tree?
trees?
Yeah, oh my God, that was
so
terrible. However, came back strong with Bug and then Killer Joe, which was one of my absolute favorite movies the year it came out.
Loved them both. The Exorcist is Brandon's number 2. All right, so we'll go up to number 1, and this is also Brandon's number 1 and Daniel's number 2. So I think we all like this. And this is one we've also talked about many, many times. A young FBI cadet must receive the help of an incarcerated and manipulative cannibal killer to help catch another serial killer, a madman who skins his victims. Jonathan Demme's 1991, The Silence of the Lambs.
Just do your job, but never forget what he is.
Oh, he's a monster. Pure psychopath. So rare to capture one alive.
So close to the way you're going to catch him. Do you realize that? Oh, Clarice, your problem is you need to get more fun out of life.
You told me you don't spook easily.
You call this easy, sir?
Lecter's missing hand arm.
Man's a raving maniac. Who knows what he'll do?
It was nicely coincidental. This was just on TV, 2 nights ago?
Yeah.
And we, of course, clicked it and put the remote down, and we were watching.
Yeah, we've talked about this one thousands of times, on air, off air, in the car, everywhere, at Subway, doesn't matter. So why don't we start with Brandon? This was your number one. Tell us why that is.
I think in many reasons why, especially when compared with The Exorcist, is because Demi approaches this as if it's almost a drama with horrific elements. It's like, we're going to play this real. What if this was actually happening? And this is how it would go down. So everything doesn't feel, nothing ever feels exploitative or gratuitous, even though, maybe as time has gone on, some things with James Gumb might not have aged as well. But Demi just goes for it as real as possible. And the performances are just, out of this world. Ted Levine, Anthony Hopkins, all of them. It's fantastic.
It's a perfect movie. I've read the books, for better or worse when it comes to some of the later ones. But Silence of the Lambs was always my second favorite of the bunch because as a book, it felt to me a little too derivative of Red Dragon. But the film just improves on it on every level. The casting is perfect. The direction is perfect. The script is perfect. There is absolutely, like Brandon said, obviously, in hindsight, decades later, there are some problematic elements in regards to, the entire Buffalo Bill things. But Ted Levine is so good that you often don't think about that while you're watching it. That's more something that pops into your mind after you've sat down with it again and you're examining it. But yeah, it's just a perfect horror movie from top to bottom. Just as classy as can be, and I don't really know what else I could say about it other than that.
I think one of the things that jumped out to me in watching it just 2 nights ago was how many newer films you can see that just, I don't want to say rip it off,
right.
But, when you see a sleight of hand now in a movie,
yeah.
This movie it really starts early on with the flashback of her going up to see her father's casket. There's a sleight of hand there, and then, of course, there's the classic one where they're knocking on James Gumb's door.
Yeah.
That's been repeated by many other films and filmmakers, and not as well. And then, of course, the one, too, when Lecter has managed to escape. That's not really a jump scare per se, but in the ambulance, when he takes that face off, come on, that is like a jump scare. When you realize what is happening, like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's a perfect moment because you should have known, given his predilections, that he's going to think to do that, but you didn't know. And yeah, it's brilliant. And I think, Brandon, one of the things that you said early on, I think is exactly right. Jonathan Demme approaches this there's nothing gratuitous about it. The color palette is very muted. The music is just beautiful. There's none like screechy sort of prepare you for something that's going to be scary. And, actually, Seven, I think, it takes a lot of inspiration from this movie, where it's a horror film about horrific things, but it's not filmed as if it's a genre movie. And I think one of the other things that made this movie so effective is the way that you mirror this cadet who's all good and positive, but obviously there's something about her that Demme sees as being the same as Hannibal Lecter. They're always, when they're shot in a mirror.
Oh, the way they're shot.
So that they're always reflecting each other, even though they're not characters you would think are similar, but he sees something similar in them, which is, since she's our vehicle in the film and he eats people and he's really scary, that's unsettling and almost subconsciously so.
Yeah, well, especially that quid pro quo scene where there's back and forth. They're both staring directly into the camera. Or maybe one is, he is, and hers is just a little off of camera, right? That was it.
Yeah.
He stares right into the camera, and hers is just a little bit off. And then sometimes he goes back and forth. He pulls focus from one to the other within the same frame. Is brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think what Demme does really well is he makes the horrific seem almost mundane, throughout the film. And I remember when this movie came out, I was pretty young. I was like maybe 9 when it came out. And I can remember, already being into horror movies a little bit. But the reputation the movie had scared me.
Yeah.
Coming out. And I can remember like friends, some of my friends' moms seeing the movie, and they were not horror people, but they had heard about this thing and they had to see it. And like it changed their lives almost for the worse. Like the trauma this movie gave so many people, because it was like a classy horror film. I know there was a lot of things like, this is a thriller, not a horror film. No, it's a horror film.
Right. That's such a cop-out.
Yeah,
when it cleaned
it
up
is.
at the Oscars, then people had to think of a reason. Well, no, it's not. It's a thriller.
Yeah.
But which is silly, because you've pointed out many times, no, he eats people.
Yeah, it's a movie about a guy who eats human flesh, helping somebody track down a guy who wears other people's flesh. No, this is a horror movie.
Yeah. Oh, and speaking of, we have to mention another rest in peace. We just found out this week in that iconic scene with Buffalo Bill, the song, as many people know that's playing, is Goodbye Horses by Q Lazarus, and the main musician behind Q Lazarus just passed away.
Yeah. Diane Lucky. That's really unfortunate, because she was a young woman, like 56.
Yeah, in her 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad, because that music, that song
Perfect,
just
so
works
perfect.
perfectly for that scene. But and I agree with you, Brandon. I think, if memory serves, Silence of the Lambs was probably had the biggest reputation since The Exorcist for people.
Oh, yes.
Like the way you mentioned, I have to see it because it's such a landmark and people are just freaking out because they saw it. I remember that as a kid, hearing those stories about people going to see The Exorcist.
And Jaws.
Right. And just the intensity of the movie, it just makes it all more surprising. I think when you look back at The Silence of the Lambs now, no matter how many times you've seen it, you're almost like, wow, this was an Oscar-winning movie. You just never figured the Academy to go for something that intense, which just speaks to how well made the whole thing is.
Yeah, obviously the studio didn't expect that either, because it came out the tail end of August, which is the dead zone. Nobody expected anything to happen, and everybody loved it, right? Audiences loved it. And I've talked about this in other films too. One of the things I think works really well about the movie is the way you've got the two villains, and they're the polar opposites. One is just this sloppy mess of rage, and the other is so precise and contained. And I love that in a movie, because it gives you as the audience the opportunity to go, which is scarier? I don't know which of these people I'm more afraid of. And it's sort of like a werewolf vampire kind of a situation where you've got the two completely different, maybe equally terrifying versions.
It messes with your I guess, moral compass, in that somehow, in helping to catch Buffalo Bill, you're almost like stopping yourself from viewing Lecter as some sort of good guy because he's helping here.
Right.
And you're like, no, that's not. Yeah, it messes with you.
Love your
and
suit.
Love your suit, Mom. So great. Silence of the Lambs, number 1 for on our list, and Brandon's and number 2 for Daniel's on Daniel's list. So a lot of love for that. So, man, this has been fun, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good content, as we know you would bring it, and you did. And we're looking forward to your podcast, hopefully coming soon, right?
Fingers crossed.
Give me that title again.
Oh, yeah.
Exploitation on the Double.
All right, with Brandon Thomas and Daniel Baldwin. We've got, as we mentioned, we've got a big one coming up in October. As well, in September 1st, we start with The Black Coat's Daughter for Fright Club Live. And then in October, we're going to have the premiere of Piggy.
Yep.
Brand new, brutal, from what we hear.
Yeah.
Spanish horror film. And also something else big is going on in October. What could that be?
Yes. We have a movie we may have mentioned to you. It's called Obstacle Corpse. It is going to make its local premiere during Nightmares Film Festival. So get your passes now. It's the weekend of October the 20th. It's like 20th, 21st, 22nd, 20th. Right in there, 23rd.
Yeah, Thursday through Sunday.
And, there's a million reasons to spend all of your days at the Nightmares Film Festival, because they always have the greatest movies and shorts. I love their shorts programs every year, and we are absolutely thrilled. We're not in competition, so we're not going to win anything, because George and I are both judges, and then Jason Tostovan, who is the programmer and co-founder, he is our producer. He's also in the movie, as is George. But the important thing is they're going to let us show our movie there, and so we hope you guys will all come out and watch it.
And we should say, and I know we've said this before, even if our movie wasn't involved, this is a fantastic film festival. I know Brandon and Daniel both will back us up on that.
Of course. Best genre film festival out there, bar none.
And we would love to see you. Look it up, Gateway Film Center, Nightmares Film Festival, the weekend of October 20th through 23rd. Love to see you there. Guys, thanks so much. Keep us updated on where we can get a hold of you, Brandon, on social media.
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. On Twitter, it's the only one I can remember right now, is at Brandon Cliff. That's where that's where my regurgitation of movie nonsense happens the most.
And then you're on something Brandon, right? On Instagram.
Oh, yeah, that's Instagram. I'm glad you remembered it, because I did not.
And Daniel, you're of course the Schlocketeer.
Yes, I'm on Twitter as @the Schlocketeer, and then on Facebook just as Daniel Baldwin. You can find me. I always have some sort of horror profile picture. That'll be an easy way to track me down.
Yeah, those are good.
There.
I like those.
They
and of course,
fun.
And Daniel joins us every week on our other podcast, The Screening Room. And we look forward to your guys' podcast coming soon. So a lot to look forward to. And thank you so much for this great conversation. This has been a good one. We knew it would be. Keep in touch if you can. If you've got some in mind that we missed, let us know. We'll be glad to take the mea culpa as we did for not remembering Suspiria. We love to say, oh, yeah, how could we forget that? So maybe there was something. Let us know. You can find us, of course, easily on Twitter. That's @Fright Club Pod. And on Facebook and Instagram, it's Mad Wolf Columbus. And the main website is madwolf.com.
How else can they get us on Facebook, George?
They can find our Fright Club Podcast Facebook group.
That's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You can just send a request to join that, and you will be approved post-haste and join the fun. We do have some fun stuff in there, and also we keep up to date on horror movies coming and going, so it's always a good time in there. So many ways to keep in touch, and we hope to hear from you. Until then, she is Hope Madden.
He's George Wolf.
And this is the Fright Club Podcast. Guys, can you do it together in stereo?
Stay frightful, my friends.